A year ago, I built the entire automation system that saved them $11 million. A week ago, I was fired because that system replaced me. And this morning, with just one simple command line, I brought their entire platform to its knees in 3 seconds flat. They forgot one crucial thing when they decided I was expendable. I'm the one who wrote every line of code that keeps their empire running. And I left myself a way back in. My name is Elena Hartman, and for 9 years, I poured my soul into Neurovia Systems. I was 34, single, and completely devoted to the elegant dance of code and logic that made enterprise automation possible. When I first walked through those glass doors as a junior developer, fresh out of grad school with dreams bigger than my student loans, I never imagined I'd become the architect of their most revolutionary system. Neurovia wasn't just another tech company riding the automation wave. They specialized in creating bespoke workflow platforms for Fortune 500 companies, the kind of systems that could replace entire departments with a few thousand lines of well-crafted code. I started in the trenches, debugging other people's mistakes, learning the intricate patterns of enterprise software. But I had something most developers didn't, an obsessive need to understand not just how systems worked, but why they failed. By year 3, I'd been promoted twice. By year 5, I was leading the systems architecture team. My colleagues called me the process whisperer because I could look at any company's workflow and see the inefficiencies like glowing weak points in armor. I didn't just write code, I reimagined how businesses operated. Then came Project Echelon. It started as a proof of concept during a particularly brutal quarter when our biggest client threatened to jump ship. The CEO wanted something revolutionary, something that would cement Neurovia's reputation as the industry leader. I proposed a self-learning workflow automation system that could analyze, optimize, and execute complex business processes with minimal human oversight. It would be intelligent enough to handle exceptions, scalable enough to manage enterprise-level operations, and intuitive enough that even non-technical managers could deploy it. I worked 18-hour days for 6 months straight. My apartment became a second office, littered with whiteboards covered in system diagrams and empty coffee cups that marked the passage of sleepless nights. I missed birthdays, canceled dates, and slowly watched my social life evaporate. But none of that mattered because I was building something extraordinary. Echelon wasn't just software, it was my masterpiece. Every algorithm was meticulously crafted, every function optimized for maximum efficiency. I built in redundancies, fail-safes, and a modular architecture that could adapt to any business environment. When we finally deployed it for our first client, it reduced their operational costs by 67% in just 3 months. The success was intoxicating. Clients lined up, revenue soared, and suddenly Neurovia was the hottest name in enterprise automation. I was featured in tech magazines, spoke at conferences, and turned down job offers from Google and Microsoft. Why would I leave? Neurovia was my home, and Echelon was my legacy. I should have seen the irony coming. After all, I'd built a system designed to make human workers obsolete. I just never thought I'd be one of them. The morning it happened started like any other. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., badge swiping through security with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it thousands of times. The November air in Austin was crisp, and I remember thinking how the glass towers of our campus looked particularly impressive against the clear sky. I had no idea I was walking into my execution. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., unusual for a Tuesday, but our new CEO, Bradley Monroe, had a flair for the dramatic. He'd been brought in 6 months earlier from a private equity firm, all sharp suits and sharper smiles, promising to maximize operational efficiency and leverage our technological advantages. Corporate speak that made my skin crawl. But the board loved him. I settled into the auditorium with my team, notebook in hand, ready to endure another presentation about quarterly projections. Bradley took the stage with his usual swagger, his voice booming through the speakers as he talked about Neurovia's record profits. Then came the pivot. Thanks to the unprecedented success of Project Echelon, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator. We've reached a new era of operational excellence, Our automation platform has proven so effective that we're able to restructure our workforce to better align with our automated future. My stomach dropped. Around me, I could feel the collective tension ratcheting up, shoulders stiffening, breathing becoming shallow. We all knew what restructuring meant in corporate America. Effective immediately. We'll be implementing a strategic reduction in force, focusing primarily on redundant positions in our development and architecture teams. Those affected will receive notification within the hour. Redundant. The word echoed in my skull. I looked around at my team, brilliant minds who'd spent years perfecting their craft, now reduced to line items on a balance sheet. The irony was suffocating. We'd built the very weapon being used against us. The meeting ended in stunned silence. People filed out like zombies, checking their phones obsessively, waiting for the axe to fall. I returned to my office, trying to focus on the code review I'd been working on. But the words blurred on my screen. At 10:47 a.m., the email arrived. Dear Elena, we regret to inform you that your position has been eliminated as part of our organizational restructuring. I read it 3 times before it sank in. 9 years of dedication, of innovation, of building the very system that made them millions, and I was being dismissed with a form letter. The email outlined my generous severance package, 2 weeks' pay, and COBRA benefits. They wanted me to transition my responsibilities within 48 hours. My hands were steady as I closed my laptop, but inside, I was fragmenting like corrupted data. I watched through my office window as security began their rounds, escorting out my colleagues one by one. Each carried a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate disposal. When Tom from security finally reached my door, his face was apologetic. We'd shared coffee in the break room countless times, talked about his daughter's college applications. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Elena. You know I have to. I know. Tom. Just give me 5 minutes. He nodded, stepping back. I methodically packed my personal items, a few awards, a photo from our first Echelon launch party, my favorite coffee mug with a faded, world's okayest programmer joke. My entire career reduced to a single box. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Colleagues I'd mentored, hired, and worked beside for years avoided eye contact. As if unemployment was contagious. Only Maya, one of my junior developers, had the courage to whisper, "This is bullshit," as I passed. I wanted to tell her to update her resume, but my throat had closed up. In the elevator, surrounded by mirrors, I saw myself from every angle, professional blazer, employee ID still hanging from my neck like a dog tag from a lost war. The woman reflected back looked composed, but I could see the hairline cracks in the facade. 13 floors down. Each number counting away the years I'd given to this place. The lobby was mercilessly bright. I handed my badge to the security desk, severing my last connection to the world I'd helped build. Outside, the Austin heat hit me like a wall, and I stood on the sidewalk, holding my pathetic box, watching through the glass as the company I'd bled for continued to function without me. They hadn't even let me say goodbye to Echelon, my creation, my digital child, now orphaned and in the hands of people who saw it as nothing more than a profit engine. That's when the first spark of rage ignited, small but white-hot, somewhere deep in my chest. They'd taken everything from me. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail. I knew that system better than anyone alive. And in their arrogance, they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd left me alive to remember it. The transition period was supposed to be professional. 2 days to hand over 9 years of institutional knowledge to a team of contractors who barely understood the difference between synchronous and asynchronous processing. I sat in conference room B, watching them fumble through my documentation while Bradley's assistant supervised, ensuring I didn't compromise company assets. It was during the API walkthrough that I found it. Buried deep in the legacy authentication module was an old internal token, a master key I'd created during Echelon's beta phase. Back then, we needed a backdoor for emergency debugging, something that could bypass the standard security protocols when the system inevitably crashed at 3 a.m. I'd meant to remove it before launch, but in the chaos of deployment, it had been forgotten, buried under layers of updates like a time capsule. The new security system, implemented just 3 months ago by an outside firm, had missed it entirely. They'd focused on the obvious vulnerabilities, the front-facing APIs, the user authentication layers, but this token was hard-coded into libhartman, Ellie, a custom library I'd written that handled core workflow processing. To them, it was just another dependency among thousands. I copied the token to my personal notes, telling myself it was just nostalgia, a memento from better days. The contractor next to me was struggling with a basic recursive function, and I bit my tongue to keep from correcting him. This was their problem now. That night, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through LinkedIn, watching former colleagues update their statuses to seeking new opportunities. The local news was running a puff piece about Neurovia's record quarter, featuring Bradley Monroe's smug face as he talked about optimizing human capital through technological innovation. He actually used the phrase trimming the fat when discussing the layoffs. But it was the leaked email that broke something inside me. Maya sent it at 2 a.m. with no subject line, just a forwarded chain from Bradley to the board. I shouldn't have read it. I should have deleted it and moved on with my life. But curiosity had always been my weakness. The Hartman situation is resolved, Bradley had written. For someone who likes to think she's irreplaceable, she folded quickly. These programmer types always do. They're just glorified typists with delusions of grandeur. The system runs itself now. We've eliminated her entire team and saved 8.3 men annually. As for her equity claims, legal confirms we can drag that out until she accepts pennies on the dollar. She'll need the money soon enough. Glorified typist. The words burned into my retinas. There was more. Screenshots of Slack conversations where Bradley took credit for Echelon's architecture in meetings with investors. A PowerPoint deck for the next board meeting where my name had been systematically erased from the project history, replaced with Neurovia Development Team in every instance. They weren't just firing me, they were deleting me from the narrative entirely. I opened my laptop and pulled up the old Echelon repository I'd kept on my personal drive. Technically a violation of company policy, but I'd always been paranoid about losing my work. The code was all there, beautiful in its complexity. Each function a small piece of the puzzle I'd spent years assembling. And there, in the authentication module, was the token, waiting like a loaded gun. My phone buzzed. Another news alert. Neurovia Systems announces 50 Madamar's contract with Defense Department for Automated Logistics Platform. The article featured a photo of Bradley shaking hands with military officials, my system demo running on screens in the background. I walked to my window, looking out at Austin's skyline, Neurovia's towers glowing in the distance. Somewhere in that building, Echelon was running, processing millions of operations per second, making decisions that affected thousands of jobs across dozens of companies. My ghost in the machine, now serving masters who saw it as nothing more than a money printer. The rage that had been simmering since that elevator ride crystallized into something colder, more focused. They thought they'd won. They thought they could take my life's work, claim it as their own, and discard me like deprecated code. They thought I was just another casualty of progress, soon to be forgotten. But they'd made two critical errors. First, they'd humiliated me, stripped me of not just my job, but my identity, my legacy, my dignity. And second, most fatally, they'd left me with nothing to lose. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened a new terminal window. The cursor blinked at me, patient and ready. I wasn't going to use that token tonight. No, this required planning. Precision? The same methodical approach I'd used to build Echelon in the first place. Bradley Monroe thought I was just a glorified typist. He was about to learn that sometimes. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows where all the bodies are buried in the code. And I had buried them deep. The next 3 weeks became my own personal war room. I transformed my home office into a command center. Triple monitors displaying code, system diagrams, and network architectures. Sleep became optional. Food, merely fuel. I was hunting for the perfect vulnerability, and I knew exactly where to look. I started by reconstructing Echelon's current architecture from memory and the outdated codebase I'd saved. The core hadn't changed much. They couldn't afford to. Rewriting my work would have taken years and millions they'd rather pocket as profit. Instead, they'd layered new features on top like paint over rust, creating a bloated monster that still relied on my original foundation. The webhook I'd found wasn't just any backdoor, it was connected to the emergency update system I'd built for critical patches. In the early days, when Echelon would crash during a client presentation, we needed a way to push fixes instantly, bypassing the usual deployment pipeline. The token authenticated directly with libhartman, which handled all core workflow processing. If that library stopped responding, everything would cascade into failure. But I couldn't just charge in blindly. Neurovia would have logs, monitoring systems, forensic tools. I needed to be surgical, leaving no trace that could lead back to me. That meant understanding their current security setup, their monitoring blind spots, their incident response procedures. I created a virtual environment mirroring what I knew of their infrastructure, using publicly available information from job postings, GitHub repositories, and conference presentations by their new CTOs. I pieced together their security stack. They were using Cloudflow for monitoring, Sentinel for intrusion detection, and a custom logging system that, crucially, had a 3-second delay in processing to prevent performance impacts. 3 seconds. That was my window. The patch itself took 2 weeks to perfect. It couldn't be crude malware or obvious sabotage that would trigger immediate alerts. Instead, I crafted something elegant, a memory leak that would appear completely natural, slowly consuming resources until the system ground to a halt. But the beauty was in the trigger mechanism. The leak would only activate when specific workflow patterns emerged, patterns I knew would occur during Monday morning's peak processing time when all their major clients synchronized their operations. I disguised it as a routine optimization update, complete with fake documentation and version numbers that followed Neurovia's naming conventions. To any monitoring system, it would look like a standard automated patch, the kind that deployed hundreds of times per day across their infrastructure. The hard part was ensuring anonymity. I couldn't use my home network or any device traceable to me. I spent $300 cash on a refurbished laptop from a pawn shop 2 towns over, paying a homeless veteran another $50 to make the purchase while I waited in my car. I loaded it with a custom Linux distribution, routing everything through multiple VPN layers and Tor nodes. For the command execution, I needed a public Wi-Fi spot with no cameras. I scouted locations for days, finally settling on a 24-hour laundromat in East Austin. The owner was an elderly Korean man who barely looked up from his newspaper when customers entered. Perfect. I tested everything obsessively. The patch, the delivery mechanism, the network routing, the cleanup scripts that would wipe the laptop clean milliseconds after execution. I ran simulations, checking for any possible point of failure. This wasn't about anger anymore. It had evolved into something purer. This was about proving a point. The night before execution, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through contingencies. What if they'd changed the authentication system? What if the webhook had been discovered? What if their monitoring had improved? But I knew these were just nerves. I'd been thorough, methodical. Everything I'd learned in 9 years of building bulletproof systems, I'd applied to building the perfect bullet. I thought about calling it off a dozen times. This wasn't who I was. I built things, I didn't destroy them. But then I'd remember Bradley's email. Glorified typist. I'd remember the security guard's apologetic face. I'd remember watching my team, my family, scattered to the wind while Bradley took victory laps with investors. They'd created this version of me. The Elena Hartman who'd walked into Neurovia 9 years ago would have been horrified at what I was planning. But that woman believed in loyalty, in hard work being rewarded, in the value of creation. They'd stripped those beliefs away layer by layer, like refactoring code until only the essential functions remained. And what remained was someone who understood a fundamental truth. In a world where algorithms decided human worth, where systems replaced souls, where profit margins mattered more than the people who created them, the only real power was knowing where to place a single line of code. Sunday night, I made my final preparations. The laptop was ready. The laundromat scouted one last time. I'd already started applying to jobs in Seattle, using a cousin's address. Whatever happened, Monday morning, Elena Hartman was leaving Austin. I looked at my reflection in my laptop screen, dark and distorted in the black glass. Tomorrow, I would prove that automation might replace workers, but it could never replace the architect. Tomorrow, Neurovia would learn what happened when you betrayed the person who built your empire. Tomorrow, I would type one line of code and watch their world burn. At 4:13 a.m. Monday morning, I sat in the fluorescent glare of Suds and Spin laundromat, my fingers hovering over the keyboard of a laptop that would exist for exactly 3 more minutes. The elderly owner was dozing behind his counter, a Korean drama playing softly on his phone. The washing machines hummed their mechanical lullaby, masking the sound of my racing heartbeat. I'd arrived at 4 a.m. sharp, parking 6 blocks away and walking through empty streets. Austin was still sleeping, unaware that in 17 minutes, one of its biggest tech companies would begin hemorrhaging millions. The laptop booted into my custom Linux environment, every process configured for maximum anonymity and minimum trace. I connected to the laundromat's Wi-Fi, then initiated my chain of VPN connections, watching each hop appear on screen like stepping stones across a digital ocean. Singapore, Iceland, Romania, Brazil. Finally, an exit node in Canada. To any forensic analyst, I would be a ghost scattered across the globe. My hands were steady as I opened the terminal. 23 years of coding had led to this moment. A single command that would prove what every programmer knows but management never understands. We are not replaceable cogs. We are the architects of their reality. I typed the webhook URL from memory, each character burning into the screen. The authentication token followed, that forgotten key from Echelon's infancy. My finger hovered over enter. Last chance to walk away. Last chance to be the bigger person. But I thought of Maya and the others, probably starting their first day at new jobs that paid 30% less. I thought of my equity, stolen through legal technicalities. I thought of Bradley Monroe sleeping soundly in his Highland Park mansion, built on the bones of the people he'd discarded. I pressed enter. The response was immediate. Update package received, deploying to production. 4:14:27 a.m., somewhere in Neurovia's data center, Lib Hartman, DLL received its final update. The memory leak began imperceptibly, allocating a few extra bytes with each workflow process. But Echelon processed thousands of operations per second. Those bytes would multiply exponentially. A digital cancer metastasizing through every connected system. I triggered the laptop's self-destruct sequence, a complete wipe followed by disk encryption with a randomly generated key that would immediately be deleted. The screen went black. I removed the battery and SSD, dropping them into separate bags I'd leave in different dumpsters on my walk back. By 4:30 a.m., I was home, brewing coffee with hands that barely trembled. I pulled up Neurovia's status page on my personal laptop, watching for the first signs. Their Dallas office would start operations at 6 a.m. Central. London was already online, but they used a different system. The real test would come when East Coast clients began their Monday morning workflows. 6:47 a.m. First yellow warning on the status page. Minor performance degradation detected. 7:15 a.m. Orange alert. Engineering team investigating workflow delays. 7:52 a.m. Red. Critical system issues. Multiple workflows affected. I pulled up Twitter, watching as confused clients began reporting issues. Tech CEO Mike. Anyone else having problems with Neurovia systems? Our entire operation is frozen. Logistics. Laura. Neurovia down for anyone else. We can't process any shipments. By 8:30 a.m., it was trending. Neurovia down. Tech reporters were starting to pick up the story. I imagined Bradley being woken by frantic calls, stumbling into his home office to find his empire crumbling in real time. The beauty of my attack was its subtlety. To their monitoring systems, it looked like a standard memory issue, the kind that happened when systems scaled beyond their capacity. Their engineers would be chasing ghosts, restarting services that would immediately begin failing again. Every diagnostic tool would report normal operations until the moment of collapse. I logged into an old Slack workspace where ex-Neurovia employees gathered. The channel was exploding with schadenfreude and speculation. Couldn't happen to a nicer company, wrote James from Infrastructure. Karma is a beautiful thing, added Sandra from QA. By 10 a.m., the financial sites had picked up the story. Neurovia Systems experiences total platform failure, millions in contracts at risk. The stock price began its descent, each percentage point representing millions in market value evaporating. I'd built in one final touch, a delay trigger that would corrupt their backup systems if they tried to restore from anything older than 24 hours. They could fix it eventually, but it would take days of manual reconstruction. Days during which every client would be questioning their dependence on a single platform. Days during which competitors would be making very attractive offers. The news calculated the immediate losses at $11 million and climbing, ironically, almost exactly what they'd claimed to save by firing my team. But the real damage would be to their reputation. Enterprise clients didn't forgive system-wide failures. Trust, once broken in the B2B world, was almost impossible to rebuild. I closed my laptop and made breakfast. Eggs over easy with toast, like any other Monday. Outside my window, Austin was waking up to a normal day. Nobody knew that a glorified typist had just brought a tech giant to its knees with a single line of code. The city hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the digital catastrophe unfolding in its gleaming towers. But I knew. And soon, Bradley Monroe would understand exactly what he'd thrown away. By Tuesday evening, I knew it was time for the final act. Neurovia was in full crisis mode. Their stock had dropped 31%. The tech press was calling it the Meltdown Monday. And rumors of emergency board meetings filled Silicon Valley gossip channels. But I wasn't done. Breaking their systems was only half the message. Now they needed to understand why. I'd prepared the email weeks ago. Every word chosen with surgical precision. The delivery method required the same paranoid care as the initial attack. From a public library in San Antonio, a 2-hour drive I'd made that morning, I used a disposable email service routed through the same VPN chain. The recipients, Neurovia's entire board of directors, the all-staff mailing list I still remembered, and a select group of tech journalists who'd covered the company's revolutionary efficiency gains. The subject line was simple: the true cost of automation. Ladies and gentlemen, automation can indeed replace human workers. But never forget, humans write the first line of code, and sometimes they write the last one too. Your company built its empire on the minds and dedication of engineers who believed in creating something meaningful. You repaid that dedication by treating us as expendable resources, to be optimized away the moment our own creations could approximate our functions. But you made a critical error in your calculations. You assumed that the architects of your digital infrastructure would simply fade away, grateful for whatever scraps you threw us. You forgot that we are not machines. We remember. We adapt. And sometimes, we remind you of your dependencies. Attached, you'll find documents that your CEO, Bradley Monroe, might find interesting to explain to shareholders. The original equity agreements for the Echelon development team, showing promised shares that were never distributed, internal communications where Mr. Monroe refers to senior engineers as glorified typists, and expendable overhead video footage from the October board meeting where Mr. Monroe claims sole credit for architecture. He couldn't explain if his life depended on it. Salary documentation showing the 8.3 McWors saved by firing the team that built your $100 revenue stream. Consider this a resignation letter from your ghosts in the machine. We built your empire, we maintained it. And when you decided we were worthless, we proved otherwise. The system failure you experienced was not a hack. It was not corporate sabotage. It was a simple software update, delivered through channels you forgot existed, using access you never revoked, exploiting code you never bothered to understand. Your company lost $11 million in 24 hours. That's almost exactly what you saved by eliminating us. The mathematics of karma are surprisingly precise. To the employees still trapped in Neurovia's machinery, update your resumes. A company that devours its own architects will not hesitate to consume you. To the board, you enabled a leadership culture that confused creation with ownership, that mistook the map for the territory. Bradley Monroe is not a visionary. He's a parasite who convinced you to let him feed on the host. To our clients, the platforms you depend on were built by people who no longer exist in Neurovia's version of history. Draw your own conclusions about the sustainability of that model. And to Bradley, you were right about one thing. I was replaceable, but so are you. The difference is, I built something before I left. What have you built besides PowerPoints and org charts? This will be my only communication. I have no interest in ransoms, negotiations, or further contact. I've made my point. Neurovia knows how to fix their systems, eventually. Whether they fix their culture is up to them. Remember, in the age of automation, the most dangerous person isn't the one who operates the machine. It's the one who understands it. Sincerely, the glorified typist. I attached the encrypted files, gigabytes of evidence I'd collected over the years, decrypting automatically upon opening. The video of Bradley's board presentation was particularly damning, showing him stumbling through technical explanations while taking credit for innovations he couldn't comprehend. After sending, I walked to the library parking lot and destroyed the laptop I'd used, spreading the pieces across 3 counties worth of dumpsters on my drive home. Back in Austin, I began the final phase, disappearing. My apartment was already mostly packed. The furniture would be donated, the lease transferred to a subletter Maya had found. My car was sold to CarMax for cash. New bank accounts waited in Seattle, funded by cryptocurrency I'd been accumulating for years, all legal. All declared on my taxes. All untraceable to this moment. That night, the email exploded across tech Twitter. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Bradley Monroe's glorified typist comment became an instant meme. Glorified typist started trending, with thousands of developers sharing their own stories of being undervalued and discarded. By Wednesday morning, 3 board members had resigned. The chairman issued a statement promising a thorough review of leadership and culture. Bradley Monroe was placed on temporary administrative leave, corporate speak for dead man walking. I watched it all from my empty apartment, sitting on the floor with my laptop, feeling something I hadn't expected: emptiness. The rage that had fueled me for weeks was gone, leaving behind a hollow victory. I'd proven my point, but at what cost? I'd become the very thing I'd fought against, a force of destruction rather than creation. But then the messages started arriving. Emails from former colleagues thanking me for exposing the truth. LinkedIn requests from companies wanting to hire someone with uncompromising integrity. A text from Maya: "You gave us all our dignity back." Thursday morning, I locked my apartment for the last time. My whole life fit into a rental car. As I drove north on I-35, Austin shrinking in my rearview mirror, I thought about Echelon, still limping along in Neurovia's servers, my broken child, corrupted by its own success. But I could build something better, something new, in Seattle, with people who understood that automation should amplify human potential, not replace it. The highway stretched ahead, full of possibility. I wasn't a glorified typist. I wasn't a replaceable resource. I was an architect, and I was ready to build again. 6 months later, I watched from my Seattle coffee shop as the final chapter of Neurovia Systems played out on my laptop screen. The headline was stark: Neurovia Systems acquired by competitor for fraction of former value. The accompanying photos showed Bradley Monroe being escorted from the building by security, his own cardboard box in hand. The poetry of it wasn't lost on me. The acquisition price was $47 million, a crushing fall from their $380 million valuation before Meltdown Monday. TechCrunch called it the most spectacular implosion in enterprise software history. The new owners immediately announced they would be rebuilding from the ground up with a focus on ethical innovation and employee partnership. I'd followed every development from my new life in the Pacific Northwest. The forensic investigation that found nothing actionable. The class action lawsuit from shareholders. The exodus of remaining talent as competitors cherry-picked Neurovia's best people. Bradley's desperate attempts to blame cyber terrorists that nobody believed. His final indignity, being replaced by Maya as interim CTO, who immediately rehired half the fired engineers at competitive salaries. My phone buzzed with a text from her. We're renaming Echelon, calling it Phoenix now. Seems appropriate. Also, your equity was honored by the new owners. Check your mail. I smiled, closing my laptop. Outside, Seattle's famous rain painted the windows. But I'd grown to love it. The constant renewal, washing away yesterday's dust. I joined a small startup focused on ethical AI, building systems designed to augment human capabilities rather than replace them. My official title was Principal Architect, but my real job was ensuring we never forgot the human element in our equations. The news coverage had been exhaustive. The revenge of the replaced became required reading in business schools. Conference speakers used Neurovia as a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating technical talent as commodities. Some called me a hero. Others labeled me a criminal. Most fell somewhere between. Understanding that in an age where code determined reality, the people who wrote it held unprecedented power. I never confirmed my involvement, despite the speculation. The investigators found breadcrumbs, the old API, the timing, the surgical precision of the attack. But breadcrumbs weren't evidence. More importantly, the court of public opinion had already ruled. Neurovia had created its own destroyer through arrogance and greed. Whether that destroyer was named Elena Hartman or simply Karma was irrelevant. The coffee shop filled with the afternoon rush. Developers and designers discussing their projects, building tomorrow's innovations. I recognized the hunger in their eyes, the same drive that had consumed me at Neurovia. But I also saw something else, a wariness, an understanding that their creations could be turned against them if they weren't careful. One young programmer, probably fresh from boot camp, was struggling with a recursive function on her screen, the same problem that contractor had fumbled during my transition. I walked over and quietly suggested a solution. Her face lit up with understanding. Thank you. Are you a developer? I write code sometimes, I said. Just remember, you're not just typing. You're architecting someone's reality. Make sure it's one worth living in. She nodded, probably thinking I was just another Seattle tech philosopher. But she'd remember those words someday, when some executive tried to convince her she was expendable. I returned to my apartment as evening fell, the Puget Sound spreading gray and infinite beyond my window. On my desk sat a printed check for $1.2 million, my original equity stake, paid in full by Neurovia's new owners, justice served cold, with interest. But the money felt secondary to the lesson learned and taught. In boardrooms across Silicon Valley, executives now thought twice before treating their architects as expendable. Developers negotiated better severance packages, better equity deals, better respect. The phrase glorified typist had become tech's equivalent of a career-ending slur. I opened my laptop one final time that day, not to check the news, but to write code. Real code. Creative code. Code meant to build rather than destroy. My fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting functions that would help small businesses automate their bookkeeping without firing their bookkeepers. Human-centric automation. It was possible. It had always been possible. It just required remembering that behind every efficiency gain was a human cost that spreadsheets couldn't calculate. As I typed, I thought about that morning in the laundromat, the weight of that single enter key. One line of code had brought down an empire, but it wasn't really about the code. It was about remembering that in a world increasingly run by algorithms, the most important variable would always be human dignity. They'd called me a glorified typist. They were wrong. I was an architect, and I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up, stronger and wiser than before. Somewhere in Austin, Echelon, now Phoenix, was running again. Properly this time, with its creators given their due credit and compensation. A system reborn from its own ashes, just like its architect. I smiled and kept typing. After all, I had new worlds to build. I wasn't the woman who'd walked into Nerovia 9 years ago. That woman believed code could save the world. This woman knew better. Code was just a tool. The real program that needed debugging was human nature itself, one function at a time, one line at a time, one small act of justice at a time. Thank you for listening to this story of revenge, redemption, and the real cost of automation. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's connect about how technology is changing your workplace. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about the balance between innovation and humanity. Have you ever felt like a glorified typist in your field? Let's discuss in the comments below.